This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Progressive loves to help people make smart choices. That's why they offer a tool called Auto Quote Explorer that allows you to compare your Progressive car insurance quote with rates from other companies. So you save time on the research and can enjoy savings when you choose the best rate for you. Give it a try after this episode at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Thanks for selling your car to Carvana. Here's your check.
Whoa, when did I get here?
What do you mean?
I swear it was just moments ago that I accepted a great offer from Carvana online. I must have time traveled to the future.
It was just moments ago. We do same-day pickup. Here's your check for that great offer.
It is the future.
It's the present and just the convenience of Carvana. Sorry to blow your mind.
It's all good. Happens all the time.
Sell your car the convenient way to
Carvana.
Pickup times may vary and fees may apply.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Halloween Podcast. I am your host, Lyle Perez. Tonight is episode 15 of The Dark Record, a story from history that lingers because it refuses to be fully explained. Tonight we're traveling to a small farming town in the American Midwest. Villisca, Iowa was the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors, where Sunday services filled the pews, and where doors were rarely locked at night. But in June of 1912, the quiet town woke to find itself at the center of one of the most brutal and enduring mysteries in American true crime history. 8 people, 6 members of the Moore family and 2 visiting girls, were found bludgeoned to death in their beds. All had been slain with an axe, and more than a century later, no one has ever been held accountable. The next entry into the dark record, the Villisca Axe Murders. Let's begin. It began with silence. On Monday, June 10th, 1912, Mary Peckham, the Moore's neighbor, noticed that the house across the way had not stirred. The family's chores, usually started at dawn, remained undone. The house was dark, the yard quiet, and no one had appeared outside. Concerned, Mary knocked on the door, but there was no answer. She tried the handle, but it was locked. By 8 a.m., she called for Ross Moore, Josiah Moore's brother, to come check. When Ross unlocked the door and stepped inside, he found the shades drawn and the house unnervingly still. A faint metallic smell hung in the air. As he pushed deeper into the home, he opened a bedroom door and stopped short. There, in the bed, lay 2 young girls, their faces covered with sheets. An axe lay nearby, stained dark. Ross fled and summoned Marshal Henry, Hank Horton. When Horton arrived and moved through the house, he discovered the full extent of the horror. Upstairs, Josiah and Sarah Moore lay dead in their bed. In the next room, their 4 children. And downstairs, the Stillinger sisters, Lena and Ina, who had been sleeping over that night. Every victim had been killed with brutal efficiency, most struck in the head with the blunt end of an axe. All were covered with bedclothes, as though the killer, or killers, could not bear to look at their work once it was done. By the time the news spread, Villisca was reeling. This was not just a crime, it was a massacre, unlike anything the town, or the nation, had seen before. When Marshall Horton entered the Moore house that morning, he quickly realized the horror went far beyond what Ross Moore had seen. Every bedroom told the same story: victims still in their beds, heads crushed by blows from an axe. The weapon itself was found in the guest room where the Stillinger sisters lay, leaning against the wall as though the killer had left it there deliberately. The blade was sticky with blood and hair, and the handle bore the faint impression of a hand. It belonged to Josiah Moore, his own axe turned against him and his family. The crime scene had its peculiarities. Each victim had been carefully covered with bedclothes or clothing after death, as though the murderer could not stand the sight of them. Every mirror in the house had been draped with fabric, and even the windows were covered with clothing. A lamp in Josiah and Sarah's room had its chimney removed and the wick bent, as if the killer wanted just enough light to see without being seen from outside. It was methodical, almost ritualistic, but what might have been the most important clues were lost before investigators could even act. Villisca was a small town, and news traveled fast. Curious neighbors crowded into the house before the crime scene was secured. They trampled the floors, handled objects, and even touched the victims. Some took fragments of Josiah's skull as grim souvenirs. The local coroner and sheriff had no way to establish a proper chain of evidence. In the hours after the discovery, the house had become less a sealed crime scene and more a macabre spectacle. Still, some details stood out. A slab of bacon was found wrapped in cloth in the downstairs bedroom, close to where the Stillinger girls were killed. Another piece of bacon, weighing several pounds, was left in the icebox. Some thought the killer had attempted to eat, or perhaps staged the scene for reasons never understood. A bowl of bloody water sat nearby, as if the murderer had washed his hands before leaving. Despite the chaos, investigators pieced together what little they could. The front door had been locked from the inside. No valuables were taken. There were no signs of a struggle, which meant the family and guests were most likely asleep when the first blows fell. The killer had moved room to room with chilling precision, sparing no one, taking time to cover each victim afterward. By the afternoon of June 10th, the once quiet town was in shock. 8 lives had been erased in a single night, and the home that had been filled with Sunday laughter only hours earlier was now the most infamous house in Iowa. With 8 people dead and a town demanding answers, investigators turned their attention to possible suspects. But the search quickly revealed just how little they had to work with. No one had seen the killer enter or leave. There were no clear fingerprints, no signs of forced entry, and no motive that fit neatly with the brutality of the crime. Still, over the months and years that followed, several names rose to the surface, some local, some drifters, and others with reputations that made them easy targets. The suspect who drew the most attention was Reverend George Kelly, a traveling minister who had been in Villisca on the night of the murders. Kelly was eccentric, small in stature, and prone to disturbing behavior. He was said to have an obsession with the case, even writing letters to the police and investigators long after the murders. At one point, he allegedly confessed, telling authorities that God had commanded him to commit the killings. But his so-called confession was contradictory and confused. Many believed it was coerced during intense questioning. In 2 separate trials, Kelly was acquitted, and no jury could be convinced that he was guilty. Another name was Frank Jones, a powerful state senator and businessman who had once employed Josiah Moore. Josiah had left Jones's company to start his own business, taking with him a number of high-profile clients. Whispers spread that Jones bore a grudge and might have arranged for the murders out of anger or jealousy. Though the rivalry was real, there was never any evidence tying him directly to the crime. The theory that Jones had hired someone to commit the murders lingered for decades, but it was never proven. Other theories pointed to serial killers on the move. In the years surrounding the Villisca murders, a string of similar axe killings occurred across the Midwest. Families were found slaughtered in their beds, often with lamps adjusted for dim light, and victims covered after death. Some researchers later connected these crimes to a figure known only as the Man from the Train, a possible itinerant serial killer who used America's railways to strike at random towns before vanishing again. The Villisca murders matched his supposed pattern: proximity to train tracks, entire households wiped out, and the use of an axe already in the home. Another possibility raised at the time was Henry Lee Moore, an accused axe murderer who killed his mother and grandmother in Columbia, Missouri, only months after Villisca. While some tried to link him to the Iowa case, his alibis proved shaky, and no direct evidence connected him to the Moore family. The theories multiplied, but none provided certainty. Some believed it was a drifter passing through, leaving as suddenly as he came. Others thought it was someone in town, an insider whose presence in the community shielded them from suspicion. The frustration of the case wasn't the lack of suspects, but the abundance of them. There were too many leads, too many whispered motives, and too little evidence to bring a single person to justice. By the time a decade had passed, the Villisca Axe Murders had already settled into their place as one of America's great unsolved crimes, haunting because of its brutality, but also because the killer may have walked away unseen, leaving nothing behind but silence.
This is the story of the one. As head of maintenance at a concert hall, he knows the show must always go on. That's why he works behind the scenes, ensuring every light is working, the HVAC is humming, and his facility shines. With Grainger's supplies and solutions for every challenge he faces, plus 24/7 customer support, his venue never misses a beat. Call quickgrainger.com or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
The Villisca murders did not remain a local tragedy for long. Within days, newspapers from Chicago to New York were carrying headlines about the massacre in rural Iowa. Reporters descended on Villisca, their dispatches painting lurid pictures of the crime scene and speculating wildly about the killer. For a farming town that had rarely made news beyond county lines, the sudden attention was overwhelming. Journalists crowded the streets, interviewed grieving neighbors, and published details that blurred the line between fact and rumor. Some papers sensationalized the bacon and bloody water, spinning them into grotesque theories about ritual killings. Others focused on the locked doors and covered mirrors, suggesting signs of a disturbed or methodical mind. The national press transformed the murders into a kind of grim spectacle, turning Villisca into a byword for horror. The investigation itself soon became tangled in politics and public opinion. When Reverend George Kelly emerged as a suspect, his odd behavior and shifting stories made him an easy target for both prosecutors and reporters. In 1917, 5 years after the murders, Kelly was indicted. His trial became a public drama, drawing attention from across the state. Witnesses described his erratic behavior, his obsession with the case, and his confession that seemed to claim divine instruction. But the confession quickly fell apart under scrutiny. Defense attorneys argued that it had been coerced after long hours of questioning. The jury in the first trial could not agree, leading to a hung verdict. A second trial ended in outright acquittal. The minister walked free, and with him went the state's strongest attempt at closure. Theories surrounding Frank Jones, the powerful local businessman and state senator, also colored the investigation. Although he was never formally charged, the idea that Jones may have arranged the murders through hired men became a persistent rumor. The rivalry between Jones and Josiah Moore provided fertile ground for suspicion, but without hard evidence, the theory remained only speculation. To many in Villisca, the whispers carried as much weight as fact, leaving scars on reputations long after the case had cooled. As the years wore on, the legal system proved incapable of delivering answers. Other suspects came and went, from drifters caught in nearby towns to men arrested for similar axe murders in other states. None could be definitively tied to Villisca. The trials, mistrials, and endless speculation deepened the frustration of the community. Instead of clarity, each courtroom session seemed to widen the uncertainty. For the families of the victims, the lack of justice was its own cruelty. Funerals had been held, the graves filled, but the absence of accountability left wounds unhealed. For the wider public, the unresolved case turned into one of America's great true crime mysteries. By the 1920s, the name Villisca had become shorthand in newspapers for unsolved brutality, invoked alongside Jack the Ripper and other infamous killers. The courtroom battles and national press attention ensured that the Villisca murders would never be forgotten. Even as decades passed, the story lingered in headlines, history books, and the town's own uneasy memory. What had begun as a single horrific night had become a symbol of justice denied, a case where the legal system failed and the truth slipped permanently out of reach. As the years passed and no one was ever convicted, the Villisca Axe Murders became more than just a crime. They became a legend. The Moore home, where the family had once lived so peacefully, was left to stand as a grim reminder of what had happened inside its walls. Families moved in and out over the decades, but the tragedy never loosened its hold. For many in Villisca, the house was simply that place, a shadow that hung over the town long after the funerals were over. By the 1990s, preservationists stepped in to restore the home. Rather than remodel or erase its past, they returned it to the way it had looked in 1912. The house was stripped of modern additions, the wallpaper and furniture chosen to match the period, and the rooms made to resemble the night of the murders as closely as possible. It became known as the Villisca Axe Murder House, a historical site, but also one of the most infamous haunted locations in the United States. Paranormal investigators soon flocked to it. Visitors reported footsteps on the stairs, children's voices whispering in the dark, and the heavy feeling of being watched. Some claimed that objects moved on their own. Others said they heard the sound of an axe striking wood in the stillness of night. Ghost hunters captured electronic voice phenomena, muffled cries, strange laughter, and even what sounded like prayers whispered in empty rooms. The story spread further through television specials, documentaries, and podcasts, each one reminding audiences that this wasn't just a ghost story. It was a crime that had never been solved. To this day, people can spend the night inside the house. Those who do often describe it as one of the most unsettling experiences of their lives. The silence of the rooms, the knowledge of what happened there, and the darkness pressing against the walls make it easy to imagine the events of June 1912 unfolding all over again. For some, the hauntings are proof that the victims never left, that their spirits linger, trapped in the place where their lives ended. For others, the atmosphere is heavy not because of ghosts, but because of memory. The house holds tragedy the way old walls hold smoke. Even without belief in the paranormal, stepping into that house is stepping into a moment of horror preserved in time. More than a century later, the Villisca Axe Murder House endures as both history and haunting. It is a place where true crime and ghost story overlap, where the unsolved past refuses to fade quietly into memory. What unsettles me most about the Villisca murders isn't just the brutality, it's the silence afterward. A whole family and 2 young guests wiped out in the middle of the night, and the killer walked away unseen. No confession, no trial that held, not even a name history could settle on. Just 8 lives cut short, and a town left to wrestle with the weight of not knowing. That silence is more chilling than the crime itself. Violence leaves scars, but unanswered violence leaves something heavier. A vacuum that generations try to fill with theories, rumors, and ghost stories. In Villisca, that absence of truth became its own kind of haunting. The case shows us how mystery can live longer than fact, how the lack of justice can sometimes echo louder than justice ever could. I think that's why this case still lingers. When there's no answer, no neat conclusion, the story refuses to die. The Moore house still stands because people can't let go of the questions. Was it a traveling serial killer, a bitter rival, or someone closer to home than anyone dared admit? We may never know. And maybe that's the part that haunts the most, that a crime so devastating could remain forever unresolved. What also lingers is the image of the home itself. Other crime scenes fade away, remodeled or torn down, but the Moore house was preserved. Step inside and it feels like time has been pinned to that June night in 1912. That preservation is more than historical, it's psychological. It forces us to confront not only what was lost, but also what was never found. The silence of its rooms asks questions that no one has been able to answer for more than a century. The Villisca Axe Murders remind me that sometimes history doesn't give us closure. Sometimes the truth is buried too deep, or was never recorded at all. And so, we're left with fragments, blood-stained walls, rumors, court transcripts, and the uneasy knowledge that the killer was never named. That absence, more than the crime itself, is what chills me. Because it means that the greatest horrors aren't always the ones we can see. They're the ones we can never quite explain. That brings us to the end of episode 15 of The Dark Record. We've returned to Villisca, Iowa, where the axe murders of 1912 left a wound that never healed. 8 lives lost, no justice, just questions that echo across more than a century. Remembered, retold, and now added to the record. Next time, we'll leave crime behind and cross into something stranger. A quiet stone bridge in Scotland where, for reasons no one has fully explained, dogs leap to their deaths as if compelled by something unseen. We'll explore the Overtown Bridge dog suicides. Until then, I'm Lyle Perez, and this has been the Halloween podcast presenting The Dark Record. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It helps keep the show alive and weird. You can also explore sources, extras, and more at our Facebook page at facebook.com/The Halloween Podcast or at our website, thehalloweenpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, stay curious, and remember, sometimes the scariest ghosts are the ones left behind by the living. Have a good night.